Toronto is changing, and many people believe it's not for the better. Parks filled with tents, neighborhoods known for drug trafficking, car thefts reaching record highs, housing becoming increasingly unaffordable, and areas that transform completely after dark. Problems that once seemed isolated have now become part of everyday life for thousands of people. But what's really happening? In this video, you'll discover the biggest issues that are completely reshaping Toronto and why so many residents believe the city is going through one of the most difficult periods in its history. In recent years, one scene has become increasingly common in almost every major Canadian city. Tents covering public parks, people sleeping on sidewalks, makeshift encampments under overpasses, and long lines outside homeless shelters. What once seemed like an isolated issue has turned into one of the biggest social crises in Canada's recent history. And perhaps the most surprising part is that all of this is happening in one of the world's most developed economies. So how did Canada get to this point? What is driving this explosion in homelessness? And why do experts believe the crisis is still far from over? The growing homeless population is only the most visible part of the problem. There are countless people who still have a roof over their heads but are living in extremely poor condition. In Toronto, for example, it has become increasingly common to find illegal basement apartments converted into makeshift homes, tiny rooms rented to multiple people at the same time, and severely overcrowded houses. In some cases, between 10 and 20 people share a single home, taking turns using the bathrooms, kitchens, and even bedrooms just to afford staying in the city. This has led to another growing phenomenon: people who work every day but still can't afford to live on their own. Some share a room with complete strangers, others rent nothing more than a mattress to sleep on for a few hours, while some workers have simply given up looking for housing and now live inside their cars. During the day, they go to work and appear to live normal lives. But when their shift ends, they park somewhere safe, lock the doors, and spend another night sleeping in their vehicle. Meanwhile, parks across Canada's largest cities continue to be occupied by large homeless encampments. In some areas, the tents remain in place for months, eventually growing into makeshift communities with hundreds of people living side by side. Authorities frequently dismantle these encampments, but just a few days later they often reappear in the exact same locations, showing that removing the tents does not solve the underlying problem. Another striking change is the profile of the people being affected. The crisis is no longer limited to those in extreme vulnerability. Today, it includes students, retirees, workers, newly arrived immigrants, and even entire families living in temporary shelters or makeshift housing. For many experts, this is the most alarming sign of all. Even people with jobs and steady incomes are being pushed into increasingly precarious living conditions. The impact is also being felt across public services. Emergency shelters are constantly operating beyond capacity, with thousands of people competing every day for a place to spend the night. Those who cannot find a bed must face winters that, in some parts of Canada, bring temperatures well below zero. Every year, emergency crews are forced to increase rescue operations for people at risk of hypothermia, while charities distribute blankets, warm clothing, and food in an effort to reduce the number of deaths on the streets. At first glance, Kensington Market looks like just another tourist neighborhood in Toronto. During the day, thousands of people walk its streets to visit cafes, thrift stores, restaurants, and admire the famous street art covering almost every corner. But once the sun goes down, the atmosphere changes completely. The crowds begin to disappear, many businesses close their doors, and a very different side of the neighborhood starts to emerge. It is at night that Kensington Market reveals a reality that often surprises first-time visitors. Drug users begin occupying certain sidewalks, homeless individuals seek shelter in the entrances of closed businesses, and some streets become noticeably quieter than they were during the day. The contrast is so striking that many tourists barely recognize the area just a few hours after sunset. One of the neighborhood's biggest challenges is the visible presence of people using drugs in public. On some streets, especially during the early morning hours, it is not uncommon to see individuals clearly under the influence of substances or emergency crews responding to overdose incidents. This is part of a much larger crisis affecting cities across Canada, one that has become increasingly visible in central neighborhoods like Kensington Market. The number of homeless people in the area has also grown significantly in recent years. Many set up small makeshift encampments or spend the night on sidewalks and in the entrances of commercial buildings. For visitors who only experience the neighborhood during the day, this reality often goes unnoticed, but returning after dark reveals just how dramatically the atmosphere changes. Another issue frequently mentioned by residents and business owners is petty theft. Although Kensington Market is still considered relatively safe during the daytime, visitors are often often advised to be extra cautious at night, especially with backpacks, cell phones, and bicycles. With fewer people on some streets after businesses close, opportunistic crimes become more common. In recent years, local business owners have also reported an increase in incidents involving drug use, vandalism, and theft. Many believe the situation worsened after the pandemic, as issues such as the opioid crisis and the growing homeless population became even more visible throughout the city. For many years, Canada was considered one of the safest countries in the world when it came to crime. However, in recent years, one particular type of crime has increased so dramatically that it has become a major concern for authorities across the country: car theft. In cities like Toronto, the problem has reached record levels, turning the region into one of the main targets for highly organized criminal networks. Even more surprising is the fact that, in most cases, the stolen vehicles never remain in Canada. Instead, they become part of a massive international vehicle trafficking network worth millions of dollars every year. Toronto has become one of the main hubs for this criminal activity. Highly organized gangs constantly monitor residential neighborhoods, parking lots, and even the daily routines of owners of high-value vehicles. In many cases, criminals can steal a car in less than 2 minutes, using electronic devices capable of copying or extending the signal from a vehicle's key fob. While the owner is asleep inside the house, the thieves unlock the vehicle, start the engine, and drive away as if they owned it. This technique is known as a relay attack, and it has become one of the preferred methods used by organized crime groups. Because many modern vehicles rely on keyless entry systems, criminals only need to capture the signal from the key fob inside the home to gain full access to the vehicle. As a result, many owners don't realize their car has been stolen until they wake up the next morning and find an empty driveway. But what makes these thefts even more remarkable is where the vehicles end up. Instead of being dismantled for parts, as was often the case in the past, many stolen cars follow a completely different route. After being stolen, they are taken to clandestine storage facilities before being transported to the Port of Montreal, one of the country's main export points for these illegal shipments. Hidden inside shipping containers, the vehicles leave Canada bound for destinations around the world. Many are shipped to countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, where stolen luxury vehicles from Canada can be resold for enormous profits. In many cases, the cars receive forged documents or entirely new identities, making it nearly impossible to trace their true origin. The rapid growth of this illegal market has turned car theft into one of the most profitable criminal activities in Canada. Experts say these organizations operate much like legitimate businesses, with specialized teams responsible for identifying target vehicles, carrying out the thefts, transporting the cars, and coordinating their international export. The entire process is designed to happen as quickly as possible, reducing the chances that authorities can recover the vehicle. In response, police have stepped up operations at ports, highways, and storage facilities in an effort to disrupt these criminal networks. Numerous shipping containers loaded with stolen vehicles have already been intercepted before leaving the country. Even so, the number of illegally exported vehicles remains one of the biggest challenges facing Canadian law enforcement today. For decades, Allen Gardens has been known as one of Toronto's most iconic parks. Home to a historic botanical garden filled with exotic plants and beautiful Victorian greenhouses, it has long been a popular destination for both residents and tourists looking for a peaceful escape in the middle of the city. However, in recent years, the park's image has begun to change. Today, beyond its lush gardens and historic conservatories, Allen Gardens has also become associated with homeless encampment, public drug use, vulnerable individuals, and occasional violent incidents. Visitors who arrive during the day still see families enjoying the park, tourists taking photos of the botanical gardens, and locals walking along its path. But a closer look reveals another reality sharing the same space. Over the past few years, tents have repeatedly appeared throughout the park, turning Allen Gardens into one of the most recognizable symbols of Toronto's growing homelessness crisis. At times, the makeshift encampments have grown to include dozens of tents. Many people unable to secure a spot in the city's overcrowded shelters began using the park as a temporary place to live. As the months passed, these encampments expanded, drawing the attention of city officials, the media, and nearby residents. Over the years, the city has carried out multiple operations to remove the tents, citing concerns about public safety, public health, and the preservation of the park. However, the same pattern has often repeated itself. Shortly after the clearances, new tents would appear again, demonstrating that removing the encampments does not solve the underlying problems faced by the people living there. Another factor that has contributed to Allen Gardens' reputation is the visible presence of drug users. In certain areas of the park, especially late at night or during the early morning hours, residents say it is common to see people openly using drugs. This situation is closely tied to Canada's opioid crisis, widely regarded as one of the country's most serious public health emergencies in recent decades. In addition to drug use, another major challenge involves individuals living with mental health disorders who spend time in the park. Numerous social service organizations point out that many people experiencing homelessness are also dealing with untreated psychiatric conditions and lack access to consistent mental health care. As a result, it is not uncommon to see individuals in severe psychological distress walking through the park or requiring assistance from paramedics and emergency responders. If there is one neighborhood that has sparked debate in Toronto for decades, it's Jane and Finch. For many Canadians, simply hearing the name immediately brings to mind gangs, shootings, and drug trafficking. Although thousands of people live ordinary lives in the area, working, studying, and raising families, Jane and Finch has developed a reputation that has made it one of the best known and also one of the most controversial neighborhoods in all of Canada. Located in the northwestern part of Toronto, the neighborhood gained widespread attention mainly during the 1980s and 1990s, when gang-related violence began attracting increasing attention from both law enforcement and the media. Since then, numerous armed confrontations, territorial disputes, and major police operations have reinforced its image as one of the city's most troubled areas. Much of the violence has been linked to criminal organizations involved in drug trafficking. As in many major cities around the world, rival gangs compete for control of specific territories, using them as strategic locations for their illegal activities. These disputes often escalate into armed confrontations that put not only those involved at risk, but also innocent residents with no connection to criminal activity. Shootings have become one of the main reasons Jane and Finch continues to make headlines across Canada. Over the years, residents have repeatedly reported hearing gunfire during the night or waking up to streets blocked off by large police operations. Although violent incidents do not occur every day, their repeated occurrence has strengthened the neighborhood's negative reputation. As a result, many people from other parts of Toronto avoid Jane and Finch altogether, even if they have never actually visited the area. Its reputation has become so deeply rooted that, for some Canadians, the neighborhood has become almost synonymous with crime. However, many local residents argue that this image does not tell the full story of the community. Jane and Finch is also home to an incredibly diverse population. People from many different nationalities, cultures, and religions live there, making it one of Toronto's most multicultural communities. The neighborhood is home to schools, community centers, small businesses, churches, mosques, and numerous social programs that work every day to provide opportunities for young people and reduce the influence of organized crime. Imagine living in the same apartment for years, paying your rent on time every month, and then suddenly receiving a notice saying that the building needs major renovations. At first, it may sound like nothing more than routine construction, but for thousands of tenants across Canada, that notice can mean something far more serious: losing their home. This is where a term that has become increasingly common in the country comes into play: renoviction, a highly controversial practice that has become one of the central issues in Canada's housing debate. In simple terms, a renoviction occurs when a landlord claims that major renovations are necessary and, as a result, requires tenants to move out. Up to that point, the process may appear entirely legal and justified. The controversy begins when, after the renovations are completed, the property is placed back on the market at a rent far higher than what the previous tenants had been paying. While there are certainly cases in which renovations are genuinely necessary, many tenants' rights organizations argue that some landlords use this process as a strategy to replace long-term tenants with new renters willing to pay significantly higher prices. This happens because, in several Canadian provinces, annual rent increases for existing tenants are capped by law. However, once a unit becomes vacant and a new lease is signed, landlords can often charge substantially more. As a result, renovictions have become one of the most controversial issues in Canada's housing market. For the people forced to leave, the consequences can be devastating. Many families have spent years in the same home, built strong ties within their neighborhoods, and organize their entire lives around that community. When they receive an eviction notice, they are not simply changing addresses. They may also lose any realistic chance of finding another comparable home within their budget. In many cases, former tenants later discover that the apartment has been relisted for rent at a dramatically higher price. Situations like these have fueled suspicions that the renovations were not carried out solely to improve the property, but also to significantly increase its profitability.